Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify, and when you want to take conversations with your fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions, and best of all, it's totally free. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We are going to be talking about the first two bowl games on the schedule. The Las Vegas Bowl, the Quick Lane Bowl featuring Northwestern and Minnesota. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify. Exciting times. We're going to be doing several podcasts on the bowl games that the Big Ten teams are in. On Monday morning, I will be joined by Larry Cron, who covers Rutgers. So excited to have him on the show. We'll get to talk to him about the Rutgers season. We'll get to talk to him about just the perception or kind of surrounding the Rutgers program, even the new extension that Greg Schiano just got. So we'll be talking to him. We'll cover a couple more bowl games in that episode as well. Today, we're going to talk about the Quick Lane Bowl, the Las Vegas Bowl. We're also going to get to the news that the Attorney General of Florida, Ashley Moody, going after the College Football Playoff Committee for leaving out Florida State. I have some thoughts. About that. So we're gonna dive into that. Again, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, share, review. Again, this is a great time to get your friends involved in listening to college football content. And I believe that this is a podcast that people should be listening to. So if you believe that too, make sure you're sharing with your friends. We'd love to get the listenership continuing to grow. You guys are a big part of that. So thank you guys for being part of this journey with me. That being said, let's get right to the football games, the football being played on the field. The first bowl game that we're going to talk about, Saturday, December 23rd, Utah taking on Northwestern in the SRS Distribution Las Vegas Bowl. And Utah is a 7-point favorite. The over-under is 41.5 points. This game is on ABC at 7:30 p.m. And it's an interesting game because I think on paper you hear Utah versus Northwestern. I think most people would assume that Utah is going to win. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. I think you think of Utah as a power team in the Pac-12, the now defunct Pac-12 after this season. I think a lot of people see Northwestern as a team who honestly is just, survived a bad division in the Big Ten West, right? But I think there's a lot lost in this. And something that I'll talk about a lot in these episodes, bowl games are often not just about your skill and your roster. It is part of that. And often, talent is a great equalizer. But I think just as important as talent and roster is momentum. And I think momentum is going in separate directions, right? Utah has a lot of transfers. Bryson Barnes, who is playing in this game, is he's playing in this game, but he is transferring because of the news that Cam Rising's coming back for a 7th season. I think he's like 35 at this point. But suffice it to say, he is on his way out. There's a lot of players for Utah on their way out. They've also been injured all season long. They've really struggled with injuries. And if you look at how they fared down the stretch, they lost 3 of their last 5 games and a 6-point win against a bad Colorado team. So they have not been a great team down the stretch, right? They started 6-1, and they end 8-4. Now, Kyle Whittingham is a great coach, but I think we have to just it begs the question, right? They beat a Florida team at home at the beginning of the season. And I think a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement was high for Utah. But the reality is they have struggled. And, granted, they lost to Oregon. They lost to Washington, 2 very good teams, Washington a playoff team, got blown out by Arizona, and then really struggled against Colorado. Northwestern, on the other hand, has had a very different ride. They went 4-1 in their last 5 games, beat Maryland, who I think we saw Maryland has talent, right? They competed against Ohio State. They competed against Michigan. They were 3 points from beating Iowa, and then they beat Wisconsin on the road. Like Camp Randall is a tough place to play. I know Wisconsin hasn't been great, but they beat Wisconsin. They beat them by 2 scores. Then they beat Purdue. Again, not a great win. Purdue's not a great team, not even a good team, but they beat Purdue. And then they go on the road against a desperate Illinois team, and they beat the Illini to get to 7-5. Ben Bryant has been playing a lot better down the stretch. Johnson has been a really good receiving option for them, and Cam Porter has been reliable, although not an explosive guy, but he's been reliable for them at running back. So what do you make of this game? Because I think, again, on paper, Utah should win. FPI has them as a 77.4% chance of winning this game. That's what they like. So a 3-1 advantage essentially for Utah, according to ESPN FPI. What do you make of this game? Well, again, momentum is a big key. You have a lot of guys opting out of this game for Utah. Not necessarily a lot of starters, but there's a lot of guys opting out. Bryson Barnes playing at quarterback for them, but he's on his way out. And it really begs the question, are they bought into this game? Are they bought into this game? You look at Northwestern, very few players opting out. They're all in. They're all in. They've been excited. They're excited. They've overachieved. What do I think is going to happen? 5 years ago, this exact game happened. It was Utah against Northwestern in 2018. And everybody knew that Utah was going to win. Northwestern won 31-20. Now, some different things. Northwestern was not coming off a scandal, but Northwestern, again, didn't have necessarily the talent. And that's why everybody assumed Utah was going to win, right? I think Northwestern wants to be in this game. I think Northwestern has really coalesced under new head coach David Braun. And while I really like Kyle Whittingham as a coach, I like Northwestern in this game. And I think they're going to score more than people expect because, again, I think Utah, they've had some time to get healthy, sure, but I don't think a lot of those injuries are coming back this year. So I like Northwestern to win. I got them winning 31-17 over Utah, which I know sounds like a crazy margin, but the momentum for Utah it scares me. And when your momentum is, sliding, I get nervous. And Northwestern's momentum it's surging. So I like Northwestern. I like them by 2 scores. The Quick Lane Bowl, Bowling Green 7-5, taking on Minnesota 5-7. Minnesota gets the nod because of graduation rate. So good job for Minnesota to get into a bowl game. This is a game that's hard for me to pick, and I came into it probably 5 minutes before recording thinking I was going to go one way, and I changed my mind at the last minute. This game is taking place Tuesday, December 26th. It's a 3.5-point line for Minnesota. They're the favorites. It's at 2 p.m. on ESPN. Again, momentum's a big deal. And Minnesota does not have a lot of it, right? They lost 4 straight to end the season. They were 5-3, had a chance to get to 500 multiple times, and they blew it game after game, right? Now, granted, they played at Ohio State. That was never going to be a win. But they played Illinois at home, lost by 1. Played at Purdue, got crushed. Went to Ohio State, got crushed. Lost to Wisconsin by 2 scores, right? And Wisconsin hadn't been playing very well. And now you're starting quarterbacks out, by the way. Cole Kramer, who's a 5th-year senior, takes over for Ethan Kaliak-Manis. More of a dual-threat guy. Has been a wildcat option for them in the past, but has not taken many snaps. I think I read 61 total snaps in his career. I think he has 1 passing attempt, and I believe it was an interception. So not great. But my guess is they come into this game, they run a bit more read option, try to use their power running game. Bowling Green is a weird matchup for them because I don't think Bowling Green is an overpowering team, right? They're 7-5, but you look at some of their games and their record, they played a really good Liberty team and lost by 10, and it was at Liberty. Lost at Michigan, no sweat there. Lost to a pretty good Ohio team, and they lost to the MAC champion Miami of Ohio, and they lost to Toledo, who's the MAC West champion. They started out 2-4. One of those wins was against Georgia Tech. And then since then, after Miami of Ohio, 5-1. And that one loss was a 1-point loss to Toledo. So this is a tough matchup for Minnesota, right? You look at Minnesota and how they've performed this year. They had a MAC team on their schedule, Eastern Michigan. They beat them 25-6. So they've played MAC teams, but I think Bowling Green is good enough to upset Minnesota in this game, right? And there's a reason why Minnesota is only a 3.5-point favorite. Now, Connor Bazelak, former Indiana former Indiana quarterback, he is the trigger man for the Falcons. He's been okay, right? Over 1,700 yards passing, 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Not a high-flying attack, right? Their rushing totals are not great. And so I think Minnesota's defense is strong enough to hold Bowling Green at bay. And I think it's on the defensive side of the ball where Minnesota gets this done. I do think Minnesota covers barely. I've got 24-20 Minnesota over Bowling Green. I think they're going to be able to run the ball enough, and I think the defense will be able to force, even with the defensive coordinator moving on. I think the Golden Gopher defense will be stout enough to hold Bowling Green at bay to a point where they won't be able to score enough points to win the game. I've got 24-20. 24-20 as the final. We will have more bowl games for you, including Rutgers and Miami next week, next Monday. I want to get to this report about Ashley Moody, the Attorney General, launching an investigation into the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Now, again, this is more playoff stuff. This is more a lot of, how do I say this? I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I do think it's important and relevant to the sport. So there's a lot of reaction to this. I think a lot of Florida State fans and maybe a lot of anti-SEC fans and anti-ESPN fans are like, yes, go get them, go Ashley, bring these jerks to justice, right? That's kind of, I think, the sentiment. And I get it. I get it, like, go and investigate. And on one hand, I'm like, I'm all for transparency. That's been my biggest frustration with the committee, if I'm all honest with you all. I feel like they can make any justification that they want, and they can put whatever 4 teams they want. And you can say, well, we followed the protocols. But at the end of the day, they create their own logic. And you can use any one of the protocols that they have to make it up, which I think is at the heart of the problem of this whole investigation. Because what she's going to find is that the system is broken, which is what we've been saying all along. You see, the problem with the committee isn't the committee. Now, I think they're bogus and ridiculous. Like, I think they're probably biased. I think they're influenced. But the reality is the system that was created lends itself to being manipulated by bias. Like, if you look at the metrics, it gives room for injuries to be a part of the decision, right? Which is why the committee says, well, picking the best 4 is more of an art than a science. It shouldn't be, but it is. And that's the problem. And so this is probably one of the biggest wastes of time and money and taxpayer dollars that I could ever think of. Not because, I think it's worth forcing the playoff committee to show their cards. But the reality is it doesn't matter, because the system is so subjective that you honestly can make things up. Like, who do you think the best team is? Well, for this team, for Michigan, I'm just going to say, well, let's just look at Sagarin. And let's just look at how they beat Ohio State. Okay, cool. Let's look at Florida State. Oh, well, their offense stinks now. But Michigan's great. Michigan's great. Florida State, they're bad now. What? You can use any metric that you want out of all of their protocols and to justify your position that one team is better than the other. That's the problem with the system, which is why since 2014, even though I, as an Ohio State fan, benefited from this system, saw it for what it was, which is it's a terrible system based on the opinions of men. That's what it is. It's an opinion poll, which is why I'm at least grateful that there are automatic bids in the 12-team playoff. I know people are upset about automatic bids, but the reality is we needed them, because at least there's some objective measure that says if you win your conference and you're one of the top 6 conference, or I think they're now talking maybe it's the top 5. I hope it stays top 6. But the top 5, the top conference champions get in. And so okay, if I'm in a power conference, unless if I lose like 4 or 5 games, if I win my conference, I'm in. which I like. I like that because you can say at the beginning of the season, you know your pathway. You know your pathway to the playoff. Don't lose too many games and win your conference. It's objective, right? Now, seeding might not be objective. Again, it's stupid. But at least we have finally some objective measure that gets a team in. The problem with this whole lawsuit or not investigation, whatever you want to call it, it's hard to investigate something that has no objective measure. And so what exactly are we investigating? The committee's bias? Well, I mean, you can find it, sure, but the reality is the committee essentially has every right in this system, in this format, to be swayed by any bias that they want to be swayed by. And I'm not even saying they're doing it willingly. It's just a reality, right? There's just a reality. I think I said this on the last podcast. Everybody has a bias. Everybody. And you have to learn to know what your biases are if you're going to make a decision in an unbiased manner. And that's really, really hard. It's why when Kirk Herbstreit, who again just puts his foot in his mouth and says, Florida State fans don't want to deal in facts, but in conspiracy theories, the dude can't look in the mirror. Like, what they're calling out, what most reasonable fans are calling out, is the potential for bias for ESPN influencing the committee. Like, you can't go from one end of the line to the other to realize, oh, ESPN owns the playoff. ESPN owns the rights to the SEC. You don't think there's a conflict of interest there? Like, it doesn't have to be blatant tampering. All it has to be is a conflict of interest and a bias. And as much as they try to avoid it, and they do try to avoid it, right? You have to get people out of the room if you're affiliated with the conference. You have to get people out of the room if you're affiliated with the team. You're still going to be influenced one way or another, whether you recognize it or not. That being said, like this whole investigation is dumb. And it's a waste of money. The reality is the system needs to change, and it is changing. It's not perfect. What would be perfect is a truly objective measure, but that's hard to do. Honestly, I think you have to, in a sense, blow college football up a bit. But at least we're changing the system where there's at least some objectivity next year. So that's my thought on it. We'll be back Monday morning. Excited to bring you some fresh perspectives, especially on Rutgers. But make sure you like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Take care. God bless.